Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 98th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our discussion panels twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political discussion. Today, our panel will discuss America as the world's policeman. Today, our panel, beginning on my left, is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin. Ron is a retired senior research chemist. On his left is Jerry Ritzman, co-founder of Ritzman Pharmacies. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. We'll begin our discussion with Dr. Ronald Chamberlin. Ron, since World War II, the United States has engaged in over 140 military actions around the world. We've employed our military in everything from wars to minor rescue missions, almost exclusively for the benefit of others. To what extent do we see the world's only superpower? Let me ask that question another way without tripping over my tongue. To what extent do we, as the world's only superpower, have a duty to sacrifice our time, treasure, and lives to protect and defend others around the world?
There's some short answers and some long answers, I think, John.
How about one long
do we have that duty? Yes, we do have that duty, short answer. I might think back of the kinds of things that have been good at. Abraham Lincoln, in his second inaugural speech, used the phrase, the better angels of our nature, referring to healing the rift between the North and the South. I think people have a fundamental need to help folks who are less fortunate than they. The Buddhists call it, Dalai Lama calls it compassion, Christians call it agape. So we have done that. We have looked at the eradication of smallpox, the money that ever went there, the combating the AIDS epidemic, some of that, much of that by private means, a bill in Melissa Gates Foundation, for example, against AIDS, measles, smallpox, malaria, all of those things. Military action, policemen, that does not strike me as quite what we're looking at here.
I'm not surprised at that
I know you're not surprised. Yeah. I did a little bit of sort of thinking here. Somalia. George H.W. Bush, 1992, went in there to help the famine, help all of that. It was a failed state, still a failed state. They're starving to death in Somalia. Didn't work. Vietnam, well, I guess maybe that's successful. It's now one country, and I guess they're our friends. But I don't know that our military action helped that.
Particularly in light of all the lives that were lost.
Yeah. 1989, Bill Clinton decided he'd bomb Yugoslavia. Well, the Serbs decided, we might lose this, let's go ahead and do a little ethnic cleansing here. Gee, that didn't work too well. Iraq, we were talking about Iraq a little bit earlier. Yeah, we wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein. He was a tyrant. Should we go in there and do that, police that? We didn't have much in mind for what would come after that, and now we've got ISIS, and we're not even talking about Syria. Some of that come out there. Libya. We're going to get rid of Gaddafi. It's still a failed state. They're still having problems there. So it seems to me that to win hearts and minds of people, but go on in and bombing the heck out of them, we're not doing that right. We're not learning by our mistakes. So policemen, as a kid, I was taught to say, oh, the policeman is my friend. I go to them for help. There's plenty of people that don't believe that. And in this case, I think if we say we're the policeman, we're going to go in there and we're going to beat the heck out of you if you don't get friendly, I don't think that's working very well.
Jerry, do you see it quite that way?
Well, just quickly a comment on what you made, Ron, about the policeman's to be my friend, but a lot of people don't see him that way, him or her that way. A lot of those people that don't see him or her that way have something to fear from the policeman because of their negative actions.
Just a little comment about that.
Yeah.
I was traveling on a trip with a fellow who was a native of Israel, and this was in Connecticut. Radar detector is illegal. The driver puts his radar detector up. He says, I hope you don't mind this. And my Israeli friend says, well, I'm not one of those who look upon the policemen as my friends.
Okay.
It's worldwide.
Right.
And he had nothing to hide. He was a law-abiding person.
I guess, when we look, is the world, do we have a responsibility to be the world's policeman? I know that we have I think that we have a responsibility or feeling that we need to help other people, because once we get to the point where we as a country or as an individual have a recognition that we didn't have everything to do with the resources that we have at hand. It had to do with time, place, circumstances that we had no control over, that we've become, that we've had these resources at hand.
You mean that has developed our national wealth?
Yes, exactly
okay.
right.
Right.
Nothing that we individually had, so we have some responsibility to share that. I think that, do we have a responsibility to be a policeman? Probably in some instances, because I think if the consequences for an individual's actions are taken away, they will probably continue to perform those actions. And I'm looking particularly at the poisonous gas used on their citizens. And if that had been gone by without any consequences, they would probably continue to use that. Consequences need to be pretty immediate after the action. And so that I think, and I know I'm getting kind of specific here, but when we rocketed that airstrip after the gas attacks, I think that will make those folks think twice about using poison gas on their citizens.
Let me interrupt you for just a second. Excuse me. Is it up to the United States to provide the consequences?
Well, I don't know, but nobody else was, and I think that I don't know if we would have provided consequences earlier on in that conflict if the refugee crisis would be what it is today. I don't know that. I'm just wondering that. And I think that, so do we have a responsibility? As we have a responsibility to feed people that are in a crisis? Yes, we do. Do we have a responsibility to protect or provide negative consequences to those individuals who are persecuting or killing their own citizens? I think there might be a parallel there.
Even if it takes military action?
Yes, even if it makes military action. I just can't see us standing by and saying, stop doing that, and not offer any swift and noticeable consequences to make them think twice about continuing that. So that's, yeah, in some instances, I think we do have a responsibility, as we do with feeding or rescuing from natural disasters, as to stop regimes or countries from hurting, killing, damaging their citizens.
Patty, do you mind if I ask you a specific question?
By all means.
We were talking a little bit earlier about the fact that we somehow we find it in our strategic interest to use military action in countries that have something that is of value to us,
Right.
oil or something else. But we see all kinds of horrible regimes and starving going on in African nations that have nothing but sand.
Right.
How can you explain that?
It's people looking out for their own
Oh,
personal interests as opposed to the interest of the many.
So in the question that I asked Ron, that I included the statement that most of the time these actions are for the benefit of others. Would you believe that?
Not always, no. I think every war that we've gone into, there was a specific purpose for it, and there was an interest that was to be obtained by, whether right or wrong, that interest. There was an interest to be obtained, otherwise we wouldn't go in. That's why we've avoided some cases. Isolationism is not a new thing. That's been tried in the past, actually very unsuccessfully though. I mean, prior to World War I and World War II, our two greatest wars, the United States was taking on an isolationist position until they were drawn into that war. I mean, I still remember there were conspiracy theories that Roosevelt, while not causing Pearl Harbor, allowed it to happen because he wanted to draw us into the war, and I'm sure some of you have heard that before. You know, different things like that. You know, I'm really much a pacifist. I don't like the idea of war. I understand the necessity. I would rather see diplomatic means used to handle situations. Mm-hmm. And the United States has so many different ways in which they can deal with wrongs that are going on.
Sanctions
and so forth. The problem that we run into is that we're not dealing with people that can be reasoned with. I mean, if you talk about a Hitler in World War II, we saw how well diplomacy worked with him when Chamberlain came in and said, we'll work out this pact. And I mean, that, you know, you were not dealing with the same person.
That's a 2A Chamberlain, I think.
Yeah, different, yeah.
That's an AIN Chamberlain.
And you look at what we're dealing with now. You know, we have Assad, we have the Korean president. These people are not reasonable people, and their sanity has even been questioned. So how do you deal diplomatically with that? Now, one way I don't think you deal with it is by angering them or challenging them. I am very concerned right now with some of the rhetoric that is going on with respect to North Korea. I don't want to back down to him. The man is horrible. But how do you deal with an insane person? Do you incite them to do more? Do you try to deal with them tactfully? Do you try different types of sanctions? Do you go to China and say, hey, you better get a hold of this guy because he's your problem? You know, when you talked earlier about, said that United States is the only superpower. I think there are other superpowers out there. Now, you know, Russia is obviously not as strong as the Soviet Union was, but they're still a superpower. China is a superpower, and unless we recognize that, we're going to have some problems. I think we need to continue to work with the UN. I mean, they have a peacekeeping force out of the UN that's named a peacekeeping force just because that's what their job is.
Are they keeping the peace in Syria?
They're not able to.
I think they're in Syria.
No.
Are they really able to keep the peace anyplace? Have they ever?
Well, I don't know. I can't answer that question. I would prefer trying that as opposed to bombing and killing innocent people. Now, you know, the strike in Syria was not something that was designed to attack and kill innocent people. The previous bombing run in Yemen, which was the first bombing run by the Trump administration, did kill innocent people. So
there are over 500,000 Iraqis have been killed. 500,000.
Absolutely. And there's something wrong innately with that. I have a true problem with that. I don't know.
So that part of the United States being a world policeman would be a big negative for you.
Well, no, it's not. That's what I'm saying. I don't think you can sit back and do nothing. I guess it depends on how you define being a policeman. Does the policeman require that you drop bombs and wipe out a country? Or does it require being a policeman doing other means or using other means to try to keep peace or to try to save people or to make their condition better? You look puzzled.
I'm thinking about a policeman, and on the side of our police cars here in Wadsworth, it says to protect and defend, or serve,
Yes.
Serve and protect.
Serve, protect, and that if that's the definition of a policeman, we do the police do a lot of things that are very violent. I mean, shooting up a house that's got people in that are shooting back. And I mean,
When they
take
have
that,
to,
take
yes.
that kind of action and all. But the when I think about, and maybe Bryan, you can address this, does the world need a policeman? And if it's not the U.S., who should it be?
Well, I think we can look to the consequences of the last 8 years and the leading from behind attitude. I think they called it diplomatic patience. Might have been a John Kerry term or a Hillary Clinton term when she was Secretary of State, that basically created Syria, the mess that Syria has become. In most
One
of
might
those,
argue with that.
you can argue with that. But there comes a point where there has to be a consequence. You can draw all the red lines you want, but unless you're willing to follow through on your, I guess you could say, your threat. In the instance of Syria, he was told repeatedly through a variety of channels not to use chemical weapons, and we were assured from the Obama administration
By Russia.
and the
To
Russians,
Russia, yeah.
because they had brokered this
They had brokered
agreement,
that agreement.
that there were no more chemical weapons in Syria. And we've found, sadly, through sad experience, that he still has chemical weapons.
You mean the
So-
Russians lied?
Probably.
Oh, golly, what a shock.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to go back to John Kerry and Barack Obama and talk about relationships with countries like Russia. When there's a vacuum of power, the people that we really don't want to have involved step in. So Russia has stepped in now to the Middle East, and they have a foothold in the Middle East, and before they really didn't. China's issues and the problems we have with North Korea, in most of the instances that I've looked at, there were brutal dictators pillaging their countries.
Agreed.
Some of the reasons why some of the countries in Africa have never really been able to get off the mat is that the dictators have been just raping those countries
Idi Amin,
of their resources.
Charles Taylor.
Sure. Yeah. Look at Venezuela.
Yeah.
Venezuela, in the matter of 15, 20 years, has gone went from this oil-producing, up-and-coming democracy to I hate to say it, it's a hellhole.
Riots in the streets right now.
Riots in the streets. People are getting shot and killed because they're trying to get rid of this dictator, and the people want freedom. Now, you go back and you say, well, maybe there are some countries and some people that just aren't prepared for democracy. Maybe there needs to be baby steps.
But does the U.S. have a role in Venezuela?
Yeah, I think we've really messed up there. Venezuela was, a very good trading partner.
A lot of US companies
There were a lot of U.S. companies. There are some oil operations down there. They're bankrupt. I mean, the people down there are really suffering. They can't even get medication and food and all that kind of stuff because the powers that be have just pillaged that country. So I think in those instances we do have a responsibility. Now, I'm not for the willy-nilly stuff, but I agree a lot with Jerry is that, there comes a point that you have to do something, because then the result, if you don't, is a refugee crisis like we see with Syria. I think those people would rather stay in their country and continue on with their lives, but it's been so intolerable that they have to leave because they're being persecuted, they're being bombed, they're being gassed for their beliefs, and they find themselves in the wrong tribe, or however. It's such a messy dynamic over there. But there has to be something that says, here's what we're looking for, and as long as you operate within that realm, you won't have problems with us. But when you start gassing your population, there's gonna, we're gonna come and we're gonna make sure that stops.
Jerry, in a minute I'm going to ask you a question about Haiti, but first I think Ron wants to respond to something about that Bryan said about Syria. Am I right?
I think you're right. I think you're right.
that you want to
Yeah,
respond.
no, I'm, well, you talked about Syria as a result of diplomatic policies by the Obama did not work. That didn't give rise to Syria. Iraq gave rise to Syria.
Well,
I mean, it emboldened. We didn't have a
Yeah.
plan in Iraq. It emboldened Assad, I think.
right. But when you're dealing with brutal dictators, they don't think the way we think.
Well, I agree with that, and that's a dilemma for us pacifist.
We have to
and-
speak
and-
their language, is that what you're saying?
Right. And
Bryan?
you have to be able to say to the Assads and the Idi Amins of the world and the brutal dictators, you know, here's how it's going to go. And you know, when you have the Iraq situation, you know, I wasn't a big fan of that, but that whole Middle East region, they don't think the way we think. You know, they're not. We're not on the same page.
Does
with
the
those
whole
people.
world have to think the way we think?
No.
It would be helpful if they had a little more compassion for their own people.
Jerry, we've had a lot of activity in Haiti
Right.
over the years. How has the United States intervention in Haiti helped anything?
Well, I think it's starting to help because the philosophy of how we help Haiti is starting to change. It's starting to change more from a continued one-way support, crisis type support or natural disasters type support, to a support that says, look, we're going to help you become self-sustaining. We're going to give you the particular resources and training and education and motivation so you can become self-sustaining. Because if we continue to have one-way aid, it just grows dependency and expectation, and then after that entitlement, a feeling of entitlement. So it's changing gradually, but those types of things take a long time.
But
There's a great analogy there with looking at church mission
Right.
things as they were in the 19th century. It's just go in and let's just change them.
Yeah.
Now church missions are let's go in and help people become self-sufficient.
Exactly.
If along the way they embrace our religious philosophy, fine.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
not one of our primary purposes. Help people. Help
You know-
people help themselves.
And we talked about this earlier, one of the concerns that I have is that we tend, at least that seems to be the pattern now, we're going into these different hotbeds without a plan. It's like, okay, we're going to bomb the airstrip, but what do you do next? What is and I realize I don't expect the military to come out and say we're going to do this first, this second, this third, but I really question whether there is a plan. Do we have a plan with North Korea, or is it just we're going to do this, and then if something happens, we'll deal with it later? And I think that's what happened with Iraq, too. I mean, we went in, but what was the real purpose of going into Iraq? And what did we hope to accomplish? Did we really think that the Iraqi people were going to say, we love America, we'll become just like you? It is a different culture.
was it just PR that led us to believe that they really did adopt democracy? Remember the purple thumb elections and all of that? We were
Arab Spring.
What we were led to believe they were really happy about voting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
look at Egypt, you know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The Arab Spring, you know.
well, and then they elected somebody, you know.
Well, I think we have some responsibility to at least create somewhat of an environment that allows a democratic a principle to take root, whether it does or not. You know, look at Egypt. I mean, any one of those countries. It's obvious to me that those people, unfortunately, don't respond to what we think would create would change a behavior. You know, they're very tribal people. You know, they don't look at things the way we do. So maybe democracy, like I said, isn't the right next step for them. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a benevolent dictator. Maybe it's a king. You know, some sort of monarchy or something like that, where the people can slowly sort of matriculate to a democracy. But I don't know if we can just stand back and do nothing when people like Assad and the brutal dictators just.
I had never heard anything about Assad until the rebellion started. I mean, was he?
He wasn't as bad. I mean, I think he's actually obtained more and more power along the line, and he was pretty much controlled. Mm-hmm. But the U.S. and Russia both need him to be in their courts so that they can put their planes there. That's their main. Isn't that the main place where they can take off planes from and so forth?
Well, Turkey is a pretty big jumping off point, but it's such a mess. I mean, one minute the guy's your friend, the next minute he's your enemy. Yeah. I mean, you can go online and pick out any number of pictures of him shaking hands with some pretty serious people in our government, because at one point in time he was sort of considered an ally.
I heard the other day that the rebels in Syria are largely Kurds, and that they have, in essence, joined forces with ISIS in their battle against Assad. Doesn't that make us sort of complicit in? I mean, we're now holding hands with ISIS. No.
Yeah.
I don't know if it is or not.
3 ways are never easy.
From experience?
Syria, ISIS, and
never thought about that. Well, listen, today I'm not ending with a quote, and one of the reasons is I could not find a reasonable sounding quote that had anything to do with the U.S. as a world policeman.
Well, there's the Teddy Roosevelt one.
Yeah.
As it walk softly and carry a big stick.
Yep.
Oh, that was.
Yeah.
Well, instead of having a quote, I just want to make an announcement to our audience that on May the 18th, in this forum, we will be having a sort of like a town hall meeting. This will be our 100th Right and Left discussion forum. And the public is invited. It will be an evening event. And we're going to discuss the fundamental differences between the right and the left. And everybody is invited. There will be room. This is a bigger room than you see on TV. And there will be room for a number of people. So please plan to attend and bring your questions. Thank you.